Okay, let's finish off chapter 9, lecture part 2 right here. And what we're going to finish off with, we're really going to focus on kind of the social aspects of this time period, this 1790 to 1860, and how the Industrial Revolution really creates this new social classes. It improved the lives of many Americans. We're building bigger homes. We're cooking on iron stoves now. We have some luxuries that maybe we didn't have before, thanks to the Industrial Revolution. But especially in cities, you start seeing a little bit of more distinct social division. There's a small but wealthy elite. There's not many of them, but they are very wealthy. There's a substantially large middle class, and there's also a fairly large mass of propertyless poor, if you will, wage earners. Now, before and understand that socially speaking, it's kind of an idea that it's crazy for us to think of now, but before the Industrial Revolution, your elites and your common people really kind of mingled. They went to church at the same place. They could talk about the harvest together. You'd have a rich Southern gentleman talking to a yeoman farmer, and it was just like real chummy and stuff. That really goes away thanks to the Industrial Revolution. Society becomes more fragmented, if you will. It's also a time period where affluent families, which meaning that they're educated, wealthier families, that's affluent, they consciously begin segregating themselves from poor people. It's where, I don't want to live next to somebody that lives in a trailer or whatnot, something, along those means. This is the good side of neighborhood, so let's, make sure that all the houses around us look like ours, that are real nice. So we're fragmenting society here thanks to the Industrial Revolution. Now, the middle class itself was very large, consisted mostly of farmers, those mechanics that were working on the machines for the factories, and of course your traders, who typically middle class throughout history. Now, middle class men could save about roughly 15% of their income. They could afford some of the luxuries like ice boxes, actually. Now, it's not electric, but it's being packed with ice. It can keep your food refrigerated for several days and stuff. Furnaces to keep your house warm when it's cold, and things like that. And middle class women, they had better lives. They could go buy books and go to coffee shops. They, played piano and things like that, that the working class people, the poorer class, they didn't have that luxury. Also, the middle class were very concerned with their morals and ethics for their children. They wanted to make sure that their kids were good people, that were doing good things for society. They wanted a high school education for their children, and they could pay for it if necessary. They stressed hard work, and that if you worked hard, that this was a key to social mobility. Yes, we're middle class. We're fairly wealthy. We did that because we're a self-made man. We worked hard for ourselves. Son, you got to do that same thing if you're gonna have a nice life. It's probably the same stuff you hear me preaching every day in class, basically. So that self-made man actually becomes a central theme to popular American culture, and it's still very much alive in America today. All right, now the last social class, of course, was the urban workers and the poor. These are wage earners, meaning they make so much money per hour. It's not on a salary or anything like that. And what the wage earners didn't understand was that by this time, the business elite really felt like that artisan republic where everyone's kind of equal and their own boss. That's a dead thing. This is a world where some people tell other people what to do. There's going to be a lot more people listening to a boss than there is people bossing each other around. You've all heard the expression, too many chiefs, not enough Indians. Well, the elite come in and say, hey, listen, you guys got to do what we say, we're your boss. There was rarely enough money for these wage earners to live. There were no luxuries and necessities. A lot of time, too, they drowned their sorrows in alcohol. The early 1800s is a time period in American history where we drink more alcohol than any other time. It was bad. And a lot of it's because we did have a significant poor population, and alcohol was really kind of a way to cope with problems. They weren't as concerned with educating their children. By the time their children are 10, they're all working. There are no child labor laws in this time period, so they're already off to work. That's more important than being in school. We have to have somebody else to help provide food and the necessities. So that's really how the working class and the poor lived in this early time of the Industrial Revolution in America. All right, now this next part is called the benevolent empire, this idea. The middle class wanted the cities to be safer places to live. Now they're living there with the elite and they're living there with the poor. It's all mixed together even though it's fragmented. But when they had to go to these places in the city where the poor were, they could not believe their eyes. You wouldn't believe how bad it was for some of these people in the cities. They were cesspools of humanity. People starving, looking like third world country. And the middle class really say, we got to fix this. And that really builds the idea of the benevolent empire. They created reforms to help the poor. Remember, reforms are changes. These are social changes that are necessary. Their goal under the benevolent empire is to have a government by God, by God's grace, and this kind of leads into the Second Great Awakening. Some of the things that they were really focusing on fixing or reforming in American society was they were trying to limit adultery. They were trying to get rid of prostitution, and of course the one they were most successful on was temperance or drunkenness. Temperance was the idea that don't drink so much, just have one for dinner or something like that, but don't go overboard with it. Now all of those were targeted under the benevolent empire, under these social reforms. Other things that were targets of the social reforms, instead of locking your crazy aunt in the basement, she gets to go to an asylum where she's surrounded by other crazy people, but they're taken care of by professionals. Up to that point, if you were crazy, you were either in prison or you were locked in the basement, because people didn't want you being seen out in public. Prisons were also reformed. American prisons up to that time period were some of the worst in the world. It was a terrible place to be imprisoned. It was strictly about punishment. There was no idea of rehabilitating inmates to have them come out into society and be productive members. And that's going to change in this time period because women are really the backbone of this. Dorothea Dix and some others, they really say, hey, listen, it does no good to punish these people. Then they get out into society and they're even worse because they're surrounded by bad people. We need to reform them, rehabilitate them so that they can be productive members. All right, last little part right here. I want to talk about the Second Great Awakening. The big wig, with the First Great Awakening, it was Jonathan Edwards and George Whitefield. Charles Finney is the guy who's kind of the big name for the Second Great Awakening, Presbyterian. Second Great Awakening builds up the congregations of the Baptists, the Methodists, especially. Those two get more than anyone else, but Presbyterians and others as well see huge increases in their congregations. Charles Finney's main message was that human beings or man, was a moral free agent, that you could choose your salvation. It wasn't chosen for you by God. You choose to do the right things, accept Jesus as your Savior, and you can be saved. And that was a message that many people could wrap their minds around and said, yeah, if I do good things, I get to live in a better place when this poor world is over. But there were a lot of the poor who we don't want to listen to this. He was trying to get rid of working on the Sabbath. He was trying to return to the days when you didn't work on Sundays. And the poor, if I got to work Sunday to survive. And so there was a little bit of this. He was more successful in the middle class than he was with the poor. He was also fairly successful in converting business elites, who would convert and would, promised him that they would try to get their workers to convert as well. Again, temperance was the most successful of the Christian movements in this time period. And into all of this is this huge cultural melting pot that America has become. You have the poorest immigrants of all coming over in the mid-1800s are the Irish Catholics. They're coming over from Ireland because of a potato famine where some million of them died. They come over here, they're poor, they have the worst jobs, and they're Catholic. They don't like Protestants. Protestants don't like them. It gets pretty bad. And the Second Great Awakening really helps lead to anti-Catholic feelings. There was a movement called nativism. And nativism was, don't give jobs to these immigrants, give jobs to natives, which typically 9 out of 10 times was, of course, a Protestant. So you're not giving a job to a Catholic. And even in today's society, you can see kind of the anti-Catholicism that exists in America to this day. There were riots against Catholics. There were mobs that beat Catholics up. There was violence in this time period due to religious differences. All right, so that's the big idea of Chapter 9. You see the Industrial Revolution coming in. That, along with the transportation systems in America, are going to build a market revolution. Farmers got to get his goods to market. America is growing up. We're starting to become an economical powerhouse. But there's this counter movement to all this: work, 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 sacrifice your relationship with God. And so that brings about the Second Great Awakening, led by Charles Finney and others. Okay, so make sure that you can see the big picture, the cause and effect that's going on for this chapter.